Alleyne is currently a professor in the Department of English in the College of Humanities. He's known professionally around the world as a pioneer in the study of Caribbean languages. He's the author of numerous texts that are of great significance. He's also a past president of the Society of Caribbean Linguistics and professor emeritus of the University of the West Indies. He's also served as Secretary General of UNICA, which is the Association of Universities and Research Institutions of the Caribbean. What significant changes have you seen during your career?
It's a difficult thing and an easy thing on the other hand, because they've been difficult because there have been so many significant changes, I think. But easy because there's one of these changes which I think stands out, and that is the introduction of a PhD program in English, one in literature and the other in linguistics, which I think is very innovative because, regardless of what people like me in the Caribbean think,
right,
the Caribbean really is just a small speck on the map of the world. We are all in the Caribbean, but it amazes me when I come here and I ask my students, the first day of class, do you know where I'm from? I'm from Trinidad. And do you know where that is? The vast majority of the class has no idea where Trinidad is. So even at that elemental level, there's a big distance. As it turns out, I think the Anglo-Caribbean provides a very important area for research, for study, on a purely academic basis. If you look at what has happened in the case of the award of Nobel Prizes, it is astonishing that a small area like the Anglo-Caribbean already has 2 Nobel Prizes for literature. So there's that proximity then to a vast reservoir of research material that can build a proper program. Then we have, of course, the case of the languages of the Caribbean, which provides for linguistic science. The program was beyond area studies because it's not simply the study of a group of places in the same geographical area, but it has its own academic merit. There are so many aspects of the Caribbean which require multidisciplinary approaches. You can't just go to Caribbean language without introducing society, sociology, without introducing culture studies in order to get a grasp. So the very nature of the Caribbean invites multidisciplinary approaches, and that's what we have in the program, a clear-cut multidisciplinary program where students have to show abilities in 3 areas of the academic activity, not only, 3 areas, not only in language and literature, but also in culture.
So I'd like to ask you about that. Maybe especially as a West Indian person living in Puerto Rico.
Because in the current rush to globalization, I think humanities has suffered considerably. And Puerto Rico, within this concept of globalization, has a very interesting position because Puerto Rico, on the one hand, is linked to the United States, which is almost a leader in the campaign for globalization. But on the other hand, Puerto Rico represents a separate ethnicity, an ethnicity that you wouldn't think if you looked at it as a link with the United States. Puerto Ricans should look at the humanities as a means of supporting their own desire to preserve an ethnicity and a culture separate from what the globalization process is probably asking of it. In fact, not probably. The globalization process is asking of Puerto Rico to anglicize itself.
Right.
And Puerto Rico, as far as I can see, is resisting.
So the humanities could serve as a resource,
Of course, yes,
to confront these current challenges.
Puerto Rico, like the rest of the Caribbean, is very strong in entertainment. It's one of the biggest industries, really.
Especially music.
Yeah, music. and the use of language in many other areas in theater and so on. So I think there again, it's part of the globalization, but it's something that we can contribute. Right, in terms of entertainment, chiefly in music, of course, but not only in music, in other things like food, for example. A lot of people eat to entertain themselves by eating, and I think we have ways in which we can deal with the globalization process by entering it on the one hand, and also staying away from its worst manifestations. That is one of the worst manifestations being the way in which globalization wants to erase cultural and ethnic differences.
Which projects for you have been, or what project has been of the greatest significance?
I think it has to be my writing of the book that you mentioned there, Construction and Representation of Race and Ethnicity in the Caribbean.
Considering your teaching career, what's a very significant memory, or what's most significant to you about your teaching career?
Yes, I see what you mean. Well, again, very, very many memories, I must say, but the one perhaps which I should mention is that I was the main advisor for a dissertation by someone from St. Martin, which is one of the tiniest islands of the Caribbean, rather unknown to people.
Can you speak about your current projects?
The title tentatively is Caribbean Communication, Issues in Caribbean Communication. But another thing I've been working on, but it's kind of stalled, that is an encyclopedia of Trinidad and Tobago.
How many volumes would the encyclopedia have?
Some encyclopedias of one volume.
Okay.
I thought of 2 volumes, but these days you can't get publishers to do that, especially about Trinidad. I mean, maybe you could get it about England or another important country. Publishers are in a bind now, serious economic bind, and they don't like too long things. Also, I am very interested in writing something which I would call the defense and illustration of the Jamaican language and of other oppressed languages of the Caribbean. Highly polemical book, but I think it's very necessary.
Who do you imagine as your audience? Do you imagine someone with a lot of background in linguistics, an educated member of the general public? How do you deal with that?
I would dedicate it to the people of Jamaica and hope that the people of Jamaica would read it and be inspired by it. But I would want to highlight the usefulness of the book for people who are engaged in community development, for whom it's important that people have more confidence in their own culture and in their own society than they do at the moment. It will include also other, as I call them, oppressed languages of the Caribbean. I would like to convince those that they are wrong, that all these expressions of Caribbean culture, from language to literature to whatever it is, to music, have their own legitimacy, and we must recognize them as equal contributions to the humanity of the world, and that's where the humanities comes in again. I think it would be a book that meets the needs of let us call it a resurgence of humanities studies in the Caribbean, where people will see how in other areas people took control of the humanistic destiny and raised the level of their own cultural productions, like language and literature, and as people in France had to do, and that we can do it as well in the Caribbean.
Obviously, you came out a linguist with multidisciplinary interests, but when did you first become interested in linguistics, and how?
Well, if we can separate language from linguistics, I'm not sure. I mean, I look at myself as having started out with a love of language. But it was because Trinidad is a kind of, I guess you would call it, cosmopolitan country. And in my growing up in Trinidad, I was confronted with English, of course, with Spanish, with French, and French Creole. I decided that I would now embrace modern linguistics, because what I had been doing so far was a linguistics that was called philology, which was ancient. It belonged to the 19th century. And of course, the other main factor was that I realized that sociolinguistics was more appropriate for the Caribbean than Romance philology. I did the thing in St. Lucia called Language and Society in St. Lucia. And then my second article, again published by Caribbean, by the Institute of Caribbean Studies, was on language communication in Jamaica. I was looking at the way in which politicians shifted from the Jamaican Creole to Standard English when they are in front of an audience on the campaign trail. I mean, political scientists were very impressed with it because it was the first time that someone was looking at political divisions and political discourse from that point of view of how you select the version of Jamaican language that was most appropriate to the political situation that you found yourself in.
And then later you looked at Haitian.
While learning, not only learning the Haitian language, but also hearing Haitian poetry in the language of Haiti. Very fascinating. It was something that you wouldn't do in Jamaica, but in Haiti we found that people had this confidence in their language that they would write in the language first of all, and not only write in the language, but on a Friday evening or Saturday evening, when you go to the clubs in Carrefour in Port-au-Prince, poets would come there and have a kind of open mic and just recite their poetry to the audience of people in there. I thought that was perfectly beautiful and fascinating. The Caribbean is such a rich area for language study because of the complexity and the diversity of the language material in the Caribbean. So I was sitting right in the middle of this vast reservoir of material. So I think it was a natural thing that I should switch to linguistics now, sociolinguistics, and say bye-bye to Romance philology.